Hey there, island dreamers, locals, and anyone craving a slice of paradise. Welcome back, or welcome for the first time, to the Fun and Key West podcast, where the vibe is always laid back, the stories are salty, and the drinks, well, are definitely frozen. I'm your host, Michelle O'Connor, your unofficial tour guide to the Conch Republic. Whether you're planning your first trip, your fifth trip, or you're just daydreaming about trading the cubicle for the ocean breeze, you are in the right place. Here's the deal. This podcast is your insider's guide to all things Key West. We're talking where to eat, hello, conch fritters and key lime pie, where to drink, spoiler alert, there will be rum, where to stay, and all the quirky, wonderful things that make Key West the one-of-a-kind paradise we all love. Plus, we'll keep you up to date on the latest happenings, festivals, events, maybe even the occasional Hemingway lookalike sighting. And just to keep things spicy, we'll be bringing on some amazing guests now and then, locals, business owners, and people who know the island like the back of their sandy hand. So grab your flip-flops, pour yourself a cold one, and let's escape to the island state of mind together, whether you're tuning in from your hammock or your commute, while wishing it was a hammock. We've got all the Key West goodness coming your way. Thanks for being here. It's going to be a lot of fun in Key West. Let's dive in. Cue the conch shell horn. Welcome to Historic Marker Monday, your weekly dose of fascinating history with a tropical twist. Today, we are diving into the sun-soaked shores of Key West during the Civil War. Grab your sunscreen, your curiosity, and maybe a splash of rum, because we're uncovering how this party town turned into a strategic powerhouse that helped shape American history. From Union blockades to sneaky British ships and even a little maritime drama, this episode is packed with stories that'll make you see Key West in a whole new light. Let's set sail back to the 1860s and get started.
Welcome to Fun in Key West, where every day feels like a mini fest. Grab a drink, take it slow. We'll show you where the locals go. Bold, fun, and stories to tell. Fake gems you know so well. Your Key West, and here this day. It's Fun in Key West. Every day.
Happy Monday, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Historic Marker Monday. Today, we are delving into some interesting times in Key West. This is during the height of the Civil War. So we're going to go back to the 1860s, and I want you to grab your sunscreen, your curiosity, and maybe some rum. And because we are going to show why during this time, Key West isn't a party town. It actually is a powerhouse during the Civil War. We're going to be talking about a time, and this tested my middle school history for sure. But you had the Civil War Union Blockade, which was directed by President Lincoln. And I did a little bit of research. If you know a lot more about this, you let me know. Put your comments in the chat there so that I can see that you're here and I can say, hey, glad to see you, all of that, and do a shout out. But what I learned was there was a need for speedy ships. There were British investors, believe it or not, making a lot of money back then, and they were making it on cotton. And there were sneaky night runs, so it harkens back to that whole thing about rum running and all of that, the role that Key West has a tendency to play. And there are night runs from Nassau to Havana. Oh, yes, and a little maritime drama. Imagine that. So let me set the scene real quick. It's 1861, and 7 southern states secede from the Union, which sparks the Civil War. The Confederacy is formed, and their economic backbone is cotton. So they trade cotton with everyone else, and that's how they make their living, and that's their economic backbone. President Lincoln says, well, you know what? If I cut off the Confederates' ability to trade cotton, then this should shorten the Civil War. And I'm going to cut off its lifeline. I'm going to cut off the South's ports. And so no cotton can come out, and no weapons or medicine or supplies or anything else can come in. So Lincoln orders a naval blockade it covered about 3,500 miles of Confederate coastline and 12 of the major Southern ports. And the blockade was implemented from 1861 to 1865. And you're like, Michelle, where does Key West fit into this? Well, if you look at where Key West sits geographically, it is at the entrance of the Gulf of Mexico. So it's a strategic location to implement this blockade. Plus, you have a deep water port, so all the ships can come in and can come out. And so it becomes a natural chokehold for any ship trying to slip supplies into the Confederacy. And so the U.S. Navy establishes the East Gulf Blockading Squadron. And so it has stations at Fort Zachary Taylor, Fort Jefferson, and the port of Key West. And there were other areas operations, and it spanned, like I said, 3,500 shoreline miles. So it went from Cape Canaveral all the way over to Pensacola. And during this time frame, the squadron actually intercepted over 300 ships and during that 4-year period. But many historians give credit to Key West as its role in helping to shorten the Civil War because it cut off the South's supply lines. So this was the blockade's amazing impact. So the Union Navy actually increased its ships by 500 during this time. And over the war years, they had not only the 300 ships that they had implemented, they grew the other 300 and they had taken in and captured, but you had an additional 1,500 blockade runner ships that were captured or sunk. But the impact on the South was that their cotton exports actually reduced by 95%. And you can imagine if that is the backbone of your economy, that is going to have a tremendous impact on their economy. So it severely weakened the Confederacy. The interesting thing, though, is 5 out of 6 ships that tried to run through the blockade actually made it through. But it really wasn't that the success wasn't about blocking all of those ships. What it was is that it was scaring off the thousands of ships that actually never tried because they didn't think they would actually get through it. The blockade running, as you can imagine, became a business. So for 4 years here, it was short-lived because it didn't last that long. But you find that ordinary ships back at that time were too slow and they were visible. You could see the sailing ships coming in. And so they said, nope, we need a new ship design. So they became smaller, more lightweight. They had a shallow draft. They were low profile, so they couldn't really be seen. They were steam powered with a paddle wheel, and they were built for speed, not for cargo. So if you could bring more in with a smaller amount of cargo, your chances of actually coming through are much better. So think about it, though. If they're not made for cargo, your cargo is going to have to be light. So it's tobacco, it's medicine, it's small weaponry, brandy, and other luxury goods. Heavy weaponry and bulk items were too heavy for these sleek runners, and so they were going to be coming in through other places. So the South could sneak in, if you think about it, they could sneak in fancy items and rifles, but they couldn't smuggle in the iron and the heavy artillery that they actually needed. In steps the British. Because the blockade and maritime law, when the blockade was enacted, maritime law came into play, which made the Confederacy a sovereign nation, which allowed Britain to trade directly with them. And so they were looking to buy huge amounts of cotton, and so they could sell it and make money. And so British investors then began to think, I wonder how we can make money on this. And what they ended up doing is they specialized in creating these blockade running ships in England. And they hired British naval officers and professional crews to run these blockade running ships. So they departed from Bermuda and Nassau and Havana, which were all neutral ports at the time. And they did night runs into Confederate ports. And they brought in the rifles and the medicine and the turpentine and the tobacco and the brandy. And this is what I found funny, and other essential things for war. I didn't realize that tobacco and brandy were essential, but back then it was. In return, they received valuable cotton. And the profit margin for the British was astonishing. This was low risk because of maritime rule. I mean, if they get captured, the crew is then returned back. And the British investors poured in about $250 million is one of the reports I found. But today's dollars, that's like over $2.5 billion today is what they did. This is an example of how profitable it was. The British had a ship called the Banshee, and it was based in Nassau and Bermuda. And it successfully made 6 runs to Wilmington, North Carolina. And it was captured on its 7th run. And it had already turned a 700% profit for its owners. So after its capture, the U.S. Navy seized it, and they used it as a blockading ship. So it added to their fleet. But the British owners, they said, no worries. We'll just go build another Banshee too. And that's what they did. As history shows, the blockade was successful. It proved to be a very powerful weapon for the Union against the Confederacy. It choked off their trade. It reduced their export income. It made southern ports too risky for ordinary ships to go in, so you weren't even getting normal traffic coming through. And it strangled the Confederate supply chains. But only a handful of lives were lost compared to all the other military strategies that were engaged at during the time. And historians believe that the blockade was a decisive factor in the Confederate defeat. And Key West was right at the heart of it. So if you've ever walked around Fort Zack or took the trip out to see Fort Jefferson and wondered why those massive brick giants guard the coastline, this is part of the reason. So now this is one of the reasons that they exist. This is one of the services that they provided for the area. They were the nerve centers of one of the most important naval operations in American history. And so I always encourage people, as you're starting to walk around Key West, to make sure you check out those historic markers. And that's what we do on Mondays, is we stop in and we talk about some of these historic markers. It was really interesting, and I think I talked about this last week. I'm walking through Truman Annex, and I'm taking updated photos for the blogs and for our self-guided walking tour over at FunInKeyWest.com. And I run into somebody, and they're like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm just taking pictures of the historic markers. And they nod and they move on. And then they come back and they're like, what historic markers? And I'm like, right there's a historic marker. And they're like, you know what? Walked by that a dozen times, 1,000 times, and never once realized what it was. And like I said, we were in Truman Annex, and I pointed out, well, you've got the little White House, you have the weather station, you have the Marine Hospital, and now they're being repurposed for other things, except for the little White House. And it sparked some interest. So hopefully you continue to walk around and check out all the others, which I always encourage you all to do, is check out those historic markers as you're walking around Key West, because you just never know what kind of story you're going to hear, or what kind of story is going to link back to something that you didn't realize had a Key West connection. There are so many connections in American history and maritime history to Key West. And once you start going through and looking at all those historic markers, you're like, oh, that's the connection. So that's really, really interesting as you start to explore those. So I encourage you to do that. You can learn more about the self-guided tour, again, like I said, over at FunInKeyWest.com. You can also sign up for our happy hour list. You can grab that. That gets you on our newsletter. And every Sunday, to the best of my ability, I send out a newsletter giving you a recap of things that we talk about and what we did during the week. But also, I have a trivia question that I put out every week. And that gets you an opportunity, if you get it right, to be put into the drawing for our monthly Key West surprise box. You just never know what could be in it. It could be fun and Key West swag. It could be something from Key West. You just never know. That's the fun of it. And so we're just now starting our December box. So head over, sign up, and be sure to put in your guess on those trivia questions. As well as if you're into reading all about anything that's connected to the Keys, sign up for our book club. This month, we are celebrating Jimmy Buffett and all of his wonderful things that he did. It's his birthday month, so that's why we're celebrating. And our book this month has a connection to Jimmy Buffett. So be sure to check out the book club when you are over at our website, and it is free to join. I know, isn't it amazing? Come December, you're looking for ways to save money. I know. I am Michelle with Fun in Key West. Thank you so much for stopping by for another episode of Historic Marker Monday. You guys have a great day, and we will be talking to you tomorrow. Bye. Well, who knew Key West wasn't just about sunsets and mojitos, but also a key player in the Civil War? Next time you're strolling past Fort Zack or those historic markers, take a moment to soak in the stories they hold. Don't forget to check out our self-guided walking tour and sign up for our newsletter over at FunInKeyWest.com for trivia, happy hour tips, and a chance to win our monthly Key West surprise box. And and if you're a bookworm, join our free book club. Every month, we explore books that have some sort of Key West connection. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep having fun.